Welcome back to the channel. Tonight, we are stepping into one of the most perplexing missing person mysteries in modern American history. It is a case that has challenged investigators, drawn in online communities from around the world, and left a family searching for answers for nearly 2 decades. Before everything became headlines and theories, there was simply a young woman with plans, ambitions, and a future that seemed wide open. Her name was Maura Murray. Maura was a 21-year-old nursing student at the University of Massachusetts. By all accounts, she was intelligent, caring, and hardworking. Friends and family described her as someone with big goals and a quiet determination to build a meaningful life. She balanced classes, clinical work, and personal challenges, nothing out of the ordinary for a student navigating early adulthood. In many ways, she could have been any one of us at that age, trying to find direction, trying to make sense of life, and learning who she wanted to become. But on February 9th, 2004, everything changed. On that winter day, Maura packed her belongings, got into her satin sedan, and drove away from campus without telling anyone where she was going or why. She emailed her professors, saying she needed time away due to a family matter, and she left a note for her dorm supervisor. To the outside world, it looked like a short, temporary trip, nothing alarming. Yet, within hours, her life would take a turn that no one has been able to fully explain. That night, her car was found damaged on a rural road in New Hampshire. The crash was not severe, and witnesses reported seeing her briefly at the scene. But just minutes before police arrived, Maura disappeared. No footsteps leading into the woods. No signs of a struggle. No confirmed sightings afterward. It was as if she had simply stepped out of view and never returned. Since then, her disappearance has become a haunting question with no clear answer. What happened to Maura Murray? In this video, we are going to retrace her final known movements, examine the major theories, and explore why this cold case continues to captivate so many people. This is not just about mystery. It is about a person, a daughter, a sister, and a friend whose story deserves clarity and truth. So dim the lights, settle in, and let us go back to the beginning to understand who Maura was and how an ordinary drive on a winter night became one of America's most enduring unsolved cases. To understand the night Maura vanished, we have to step back just a little into the final days before she left campus. In the week leading up to February 9th, nothing on the surface suggested a major turning point. She still attended classes. She still communicated with family. She continued her routine like any other student, balancing assignments, stress, and the constant rhythm of campus life. But behind those ordinary details, there were hints that something was weighing on her. On February 9th, Maura informed her professors that she would be gone for several days because of a family issue. She requested time off from her studies and clinical responsibilities, framing it as a short and temporary absence. There was no mention of danger, no sign of panic, just a calm explanation and a plan to return later. Her instructors granted the request, assuming she would come back the next week. What makes this moment so significant is not what she said, but what she did not say. There was no family emergency. No sudden crisis at home. Her parents and siblings had no idea she was preparing to leave. The message she sent was, at best, a cover for something else, something only she understood at the time. After sending those emails, Maura began searching online for lodging in the mountains of northern New England. She looked at places to stay near Vermont and New Hampshire areas known for quiet roads, scenic winter views, and remote stretches of wilderness. It was clear she was planning a trip, or at least heading toward a destination far from campus. But the purpose of this journey remains one of the central questions of the case. Was she trying to escape something or simply trying to breathe. Before leaving, Maura packed personal items from her dorm, schoolwork, toiletries, clothing, and even a favorite stuffed animal. She also printed out directions. These details matter because they point to intention. This was not a random drive fueled by impulse. She was preparing for days away from campus, and she fully expected to reach wherever she was headed. In the early afternoon, she got into her black Saturn and began driving north. No goodbye to friends. No explanation to her boyfriend. No clear message to her family. Just a silent exit onto the highway toward a destination that only she knew. That single decision, leaving campus without warning, is where the mystery truly begins. From that moment on, every hour, every mile, and every choice would lead to the dark stretch of road in New Hampshire where her car was found, and where her trail went cold. When Maura pulled away from campus that afternoon, the road in front of her stretched open and quiet. She headed north, leaving behind the familiar world of classrooms, dorm halls, and routine. The highway carried her toward the rural edges of New England, an area she knew in pieces from past trips, but never under circumstances like this. The winter sky was cold, and patches of snow lined the edges of the road. What she was thinking in those hours remains one of the most elusive parts of this case. Along the way, she stopped for a brief moment. Maura withdrew a small amount of cash from an ATM and purchased a few items at a local store, snacks, drinks, and essentials for the road. The receipts confirmed she was alone. There were no signs she was being followed, and no evidence she intended to meet someone at her destination. These errands, simple as they seem, suggest one thing: she fully expected to continue her trip without interruption. With every mile, she drove deeper into quieter and more remote territory. Cell service in many of those regions, especially in 2004, was unreliable. Traffic was light. It is likely that long stretches of the drive passed in silence, just the sound of the engine, the heater against the winter cold, and whatever thoughts she was trying to outrun or untangle. This part of the timeline is important because it raises a question at the heart of the mystery. Why was she going there? If she wanted to clear her head, there were plenty of closer options. If she wanted isolation, there were places that did not require hours on the road. And if she was meeting someone, that person has never been identified. No evidence from phone records, receipts, or witness sightings indicates a second vehicle traveling with her. She was by every known piece of information completely on her own. As daylight faded, she continued north. The landscape grew darker, the roads narrower, and nearby homes more scattered. The route she took led her straight toward New Hampshire, a place known for its forests, mountains, and long rural stretches where help could be far away if anything went wrong. Eventually, her journey reached the small, quiet area of Haverhill. What happened next on that dark road, with snow on the ground and almost no traffic, would become the center of endless debate. Within minutes, everything would shift from a quiet drive to a scene that has puzzled investigators and the public for years. Her car was about to crash, and from that moment on, the trail would begin to vanish piece by piece until Maura herself would be gone. As darkness settled over the small town of Haverhill, New Hampshire, Maura's drive took its final documented turn. Sometime after 7 p.m. on February 9th, 2004, her black Saturn left the road on a quiet stretch of Route 112, a rural area surrounded by woods and scattered homes. The car spun, hit a snowbank, and came to rest facing the wrong direction. The crash was not severe, no shattered glass, no deployed airbags, and no sign of major impact. It was a kind of accident that might leave a driver rattled, but able to walk away unharmed. A nearby resident heard the sound and looked outside. He saw the damaged Saturn and a young woman presumed to be Maura standing beside it. In the cold winter air, the scene appeared calm. There were no other vehicles, no suspicious figures, and no immediate danger visible from the outside. For a moment, everything seemed like a simple roadside accident. But what happened in the next few minutes is where the mystery deepens. The neighbor came out to check on her. He offered help, asked if she needed assistance, and suggested contacting the authorities. Maura politely declined, saying she had already called for roadside service. That statement, however, was not true. Phone records later confirmed that no such call was made. Whether she was trying to avoid police involvement or simply wanted to handle things on her own, her reasoning remains unknown. The neighbor went home and phoned the police anyway, believing it was the safest course of action on a snowy night. From that moment, a clock began ticking. There was only a small window, mere minutes, between the phone call and the arrival of law enforcement. In that narrow slice of time, Maura was still at the crash site. The Saturn remained visible from the road. Nothing appeared out of control, rushed, or chaotic. And then, in the time it took for officers to arrive, she was gone. When police reached the scene, they found an empty car, loose belongings inside, and no sign of the driver. There were no footprints leading into the woods that could be confidently traced to her. No indications of a second collision. No evidence of another car forcing her off the road. Just a quiet scene on a dark winter road, and the sudden absence of the person who had been standing there only moments earlier. It was as if the crash site marked a dividing line in the timeline. Before the accident, everything can be followed. After the accident, almost nothing can be confirmed. That brief encounter with a witness would become the last known sighting of Maura Murray. The moment the neighbor walked away and the moment police arrived separated by only a short span of time now form one of the most haunting gaps in the entire case. The first hour after any disappearance is critical, and in Maura's case, the earliest moments are especially important because they represent the last time the trail was still warm. When police arrived at the crash site, it was just minutes after the neighbor's call. The engine of the Saturn was silent, the lights were still on, and the road was nearly empty. Snow reflected the patrol car's headlights, creating a stark, quiet scene with no movement anywhere around. The responding officer inspected the vehicle. Inside, he found airbags that had not deployed and personal belongings scattered within school papers, a box of wine, and a few travel items. The windshield was cracked, but not severely. On the surface, it looked like a single car accident, the kind that happens on icy winter roads. What did not match the picture, however, was the missing driver. Most people involved in a crash, especially in cold weather, stay with the vehicle, seek shelter, or wait for help. Maura was nowhere in sight. The officer asked nearby residents what they had seen. The neighbor who briefly interacted with her confirmed that she appeared shaken, but physically unhurt. She spoke coherently. She did not seem disoriented, and she did not ask for help. Most importantly, she had been standing beside the car just minutes before. That detail told investigators something undeniable. Whatever happened to her, it happened fast. Police scanned the immediate area. They checked the road, the edges of the snowbanks, and the nearby yards. Officers called out into the darkness, hoping she was simply hiding out of fear or embarrassment. But there was no response. No footsteps could be traced with confidence because of snow and vehicle tracks. If Maura had walked away, she left no clear directional evidence behind. The timeline in this early window is astonishingly narrow. Between the moment the neighbor last saw her and the moment police arrived, only a small slice of time is unaccounted for. It is a gap so thin that it feels almost unbelievable that a person could vanish inside it. And yet, that is exactly what happened. As more officers arrived, they began expanding the search radius. Flashlights cut through the dark, sweeping across tree lines and ditches. Residents were questioned again. Calls were made to nearby departments, hospitals, and tow services. If she had sought shelter, asked someone for a ride, or knocked on a door, someone likely would have heard or seen something. No one did. Within the first hour, the case shifted from a routine traffic accident to a potential missing person situation. Investigators could not yet know it, but those first quiet steps in the cold night would mark the beginning of a search that would last for years. The hope at that time was simple, that Maura had walked away and would soon reappear. But as midnight approached, and still no trace of her emerged, the question hanging in the air grew heavier. Where did Maura go in those missing minutes? In the hours and days that followed the crash, investigators tried to trace Maura's movements through the most basic modern indicators: phone activity, bank transactions, and electronic records. What they found was a silence so complete that it became one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. After 7 p.m. on February 9th, Maura's phone never connected to another tower, never placed another call, and never sent another message. Her credit and debit cards also showed no further transactions. There were no withdrawals, no hotel check-ins, no gas purchases, no online orders, and no sign she had tried to travel under her own identity. For a 21-year-old in 2004, this sudden and total stop was highly abnormal. Even someone trying to disappear usually leaves a digital shadow, however small. But Maura's trail did not fade gradually. It ended abruptly. Investigators also examined bus stations, airports, and train routes, just in case she had abandoned the car and continued her trip by another method. None of these searches produced a lead. No ticket in her name. No surveillance footage placing her elsewhere. It was as though her life, both physically and digitally, hit an invisible wall the moment she stepped away from the Saturn. Her family, hoping for any sign, contacted her phone repeatedly. Every attempt went unanswered. No voicemail explanation. No accidental pocket call. Nothing. Friends tried too, with the same result. The silence from her devices forced investigators to confront an unsettling possibility. Whatever happened to Maura, it happened very quickly after she left the crash site. The search area around Route 112 expanded as days passed. K-9 units were deployed and helicopters scanned from above. Ground teams combed through wooded areas, fields, and riverbanks. Even with these resources, no personal item belonging to Maura, not a glove, not a shoe, not a scrap of paper, was discovered. In most missing person cases, investigators find at least something that confirms a direction of travel. Here, the trail simply stopped. The lack of digital activity and physical evidence created an eerie vacuum. It left investigators, family members, and the public with a haunting question. How can a person vanish so completely in such a short amount of time on a rural road with houses nearby? This is the turning point where the case shifted from a search to a mystery. If Maura had chosen to walk away voluntarily, she would have needed shelter, money, communication, and a plan. Yet every piece of data shows those pathways went unused. If she had encountered danger, it must have occurred swiftly, leaving no trace behind. And if she received help, that assistance has never been identified. No witnesses, no vehicles, no calls, no leads. What remained was a freeze frame in time, a crashed car, a brief witness encounter, and then an empty road. Everything after that moment is theory. As the first night gave way to morning, the search for Maura shifted from urgent confusion to organized effort. Family members arrived, volunteers joined, and multiple agencies stepped in to help. Hope was still strong in those early hours, People assumed she had taken shelter somewhere nearby, or that she would walk out of the woods cold, tired, and in need of comfort, but alive. The belief at that time was simple and human. She must be close. Search teams canvassed the area repeatedly. They followed roads, waded through snow, checked abandoned structures, and worked through rows of trees in tight formation. K-9 units tracked scent for a brief distance. But then the trail went cold to detail that both puzzled and frustrated investigators. Helicopters with thermal imaging scanned from overhead, searching for any heat signature that might indicate a person in distress. But again, nothing emerged. Each hour that passed without results made the situation feel heavier. By day 2 and 3, the emotional atmosphere around the investigation began to change. What started as a rescue mission slowly edged toward something far more uncertain. There was no sign of Maura seeking help. No indication she had flagged down a passing car. No report from hospitals, clinics, or police departments in neighboring towns. The silence that investigators saw in her digital footprint was now mirrored in the physical world. It was as if she had slipped beyond reach. Her family refused to give up. They handed out flyers, spoke to local residents, and pressured authorities to widen the search radius. Friends from college made calls, shared her photo, and prayed she would simply reappear. The community, at least in the beginning, rallied around the story of the missing 21-year-old far from home. But even with growing attention, leads ran dry almost as soon as they appeared. Within a week, active search operations began to scale back, not because anyone stopped caring, but because there was nothing left to follow. No footprints, no clothing, no confirmed sightings, no physical evidence that she had ever walked beyond the crash site. Without direction, the search grid became too large and too undefined to cover effectively. And then something subtle but significant happened. The case crossed an invisible line. It moved from "where is she" to "what happened to her." The tone changed. The mission changed. And emotionally, the family's nightmare deepened. Weeks turned into months, and months turned into years. Tips came in, but none brought clarity. The road where Maura's Saturn was found remained the last verified location of her life. That cold stretch of Route 112 became a symbol of a mystery frozen in time. Eventually, the investigation settled into a status no family ever wants to hear. A cold case. Not closed, not forgotten, but suspended, waiting for that one missing piece. When a case leaves no trail, theories rush in to fill the silence. With Maura's disappearance, the lack of physical evidence, the abrupt end to her digital footprint, and the mystery surrounding her final trip created an environment where multiple explanations seemed possible. In the early stages of the investigation, 3 major lines of speculation emerged, each supported by fragments of logic, yet none strong enough to become the definitive answer. The first theory suggested that Maura chose to disappear voluntarily. Supporters of this idea pointed to her actions before leaving campus, emailing professors, packing personal belongings, and searching for destinations in northern New England. These steps could be interpreted as the beginning of a planned escape from stress, academic pressure, or emotional burdens. If she wanted a break from her life, the remote mountains of New Hampshire and Vermont offered a quiet place to think. But this theory runs into a major problem. Disappearing by choice requires resources, communication, and movement. Maura's bank cards and phone remained silent after the crash. If she intended to start over, she left herself with no tools to survive. A second theory focused on the possibility of an accident in the wilderness. In this scenario, Maura, frightened or disoriented after the crash, might have tried to walk away on foot. Cold conditions, uneven terrain, and deep woods could have created a dangerous situation. if she became injured or lost, she might have been unable to signal for help. This theory aligns with search failures in vast forested areas. But critics point out that extensive ground and aerial searches found no trace of her not even years later. For an accident, the absence of physical evidence remains difficult to explain. The third major theory involved foul play. Perhaps Maura accepted a ride from someone passing by. Perhaps a stranger or even a familiar face encountered her during those few unaccounted minutes. The short time gap between the witness interaction and police arrival has led some to believe that if a second party was involved, everything would have had to happen shockingly fast. Supporters of this theory argue that only another human presence can explain a disappearance this clean. Yet, without footprints, tire tracks, or confirmed sightings, this possibility also hangs in uncertainty. These early theories created both direction and frustration for investigators. Each path offered hints, but none led to closure. With so little evidence to guide them, authorities had to consider every angle while also ruling out speculation that drifted too far from reality. Meanwhile, the public fascination with the case magnified every detail, every contradiction, and every unanswered question. By the end of the first few months, one fact became painfully clear. The truth would not reveal itself easily. Theories could be debated, but proof was absent. And in a mystery built on minutes and miles, the lack of proof is what turned Maura Murray's case from a local investigation into a national obsession. As the story spread beyond New Hampshire, more people began to notice a pattern. This was not just another missing person case. There were details small on their own, but deeply unsettling when viewed together, that made Maura's disappearance stand apart and pushed it into national conversation. These unusual elements turned the case into a puzzle with missing edges, where nothing fit cleanly and every answer raised a new question. One of the first major points of confusion was the timing. The window in which Maura vanished was incredibly narrow, just a few minutes between the last witness sighting and the arrival of police. Most disappearances leave some physical trace, even if faint, a direction of travel, clear footprints, or an abandoned item. Here, there was none. It was as if the timeline had been sliced open and a single moment erased. Then there was the location. Route 112 is remote, but not isolated enough for someone to vanish without being seen by another driver or neighbor. Houses were close enough to hear the crash. A snowbank open road and limited tree cover should have made it easier, not harder, to follow the trail of a person who had just walked away. Yet no one reported seeing Maura after that one brief interaction. The environment did not match the outcome, and that contradiction drew intense scrutiny. Another unusual factor was the absence of secondary evidence. In many investigations, answers come from follow-up clues, activity on a bank card, a ping from a cell phone, a personal item discovered weeks later, or a witness who steps forward later. In Maura's case, every potential lead stopped at the crash site. Nothing pushed the story forward. No digital trace. No roadside discovery. No confirmed sighting, not even a misleading one. The silence of the evidence became evidence itself. A third point of mystery involved her purpose for traveling. People do not typically drive hours into the mountains in winter without a clear plan. Yet Maura left no note and confided in no one. She was not running from law enforcement, she was not in legal trouble, and she was not known to be in danger from anyone. Her destination and intention remained sealed away, turning speculation into the only fuel the case had left. These layers of contradiction, the short time window, the open location, the frozen digital trail, and the unknown motive created a story that defied typical investigative logic. It is why journalists, online communities, and cold case experts became obsessed with finding answers. The disappearance did not read like a random accident or a straightforward crime. It read like a chapter ripped out of a book, leaving readers staring at a blank page with no explanation. By the time national media began covering the case, the narrative had already transformed. Maura was not just a missing person. She had become a symbol of an unsolved mystery that refused to settle, a case that challenged both intuition and procedure. As months passed and the trail continued to grow colder, investigators faced mounting criticism. People began asking why a case that started with such a narrow timeline and such a defined location had produced so few answers. The truth is, several early limitations and missed opportunities slowed the investigation, creating gaps that would become almost impossible to recover from. One of the first challenges was the delay in treating the scene as a possible crime or emergency disappearance. At the beginning, the incident was viewed through the lens of a traffic accident, not a vanishing. Because of this, the initial response lacked the urgency that could have preserved potential evidence. By the time the focus shifted, hours had passed and any footprints, tire marks, or subtle clues may have already been disturbed by weather, responders, or passing vehicles. Another limitation was the fragmented coordination between agencies. Multiple jurisdictions became involved: local police, state authorities, and eventually federal consultants. While each group worked with good intentions, overlapping responsibilities sometimes meant slower information flow. In cases of disappearance, timing is everything. Even small delays can create long-lasting dead ends. There were also missed opportunities with early witness canvassing. Not all neighbors or passers-by were interviewed immediately. Some were spoken to days later, when memories were less fresh. In a case measured by minutes, recollections measured in days can introduce uncertainty. A tiny detail forgotten or remembered differently can shift an entire timeline. Technology posed another limitation. In 2004, cell phone tracking and roadside surveillance were nothing like they are today. There were no widespread camera systems capturing highway movement. Tower triangulation was imprecise. If this same disappearance happened now, investigators would likely be able to track a more detailed digital path. But in 2004, leads simply fell into silence. The environment also worked against search teams. Snow, darkness, and the sheer expanse of rural terrain created conditions where evidence could be lost quickly. If Maura had walked into the woods, the cold and natural landscape could erase signs faster than teams could organize. Finally, there was the issue of public speculation overtaking verified facts. As the case drew national attention, theories flooded the conversation. Some were thoughtful. Many were not. Rumors, online arguments, and exaggerated claims distracted from the core evidence. Investigators found themselves fighting noise instead of following leads. For the family, this created pain. For the case, it created confusion. None of these factors alone doomed the investigation, but combined, they formed a chain of disadvantages that narrowed the path to the truth. By the end of the first year, the case had drifted into a difficult place, not closed, but stalled, full of questions with fewer and fewer answers to chase. In that vacuum, the story of Maura Murray transformed once more from an active search into a haunting mystery that demanded deeper explanations than the official files could provide. Nearly 2 decades later, one question still echoes through every documentary, every forum, and every interview. How can a case with such a clear starting point remain unsolved? The answer lies in a combination of immovable obstacles, barriers that investigators, researchers, and the family have never been able to break through. The first barrier is the absence of physical evidence. Most long-term cases persist because there are too many clues to sort through. In Maura's case, the problem is the opposite. There is almost nothing. No personal items discovered later. No clothing found by hikers. No belongings washed up near rivers. No partial remains linked to her DNA. When a case has no physical anchor, theories multiply while certainty becomes impossible. The second barrier is the frozen timeline. Because Maura vanished within such a tiny window of time, there is almost no room for investigators to explore alternate versions of events. The story begins, climaxes, and collapses all within a handful of minutes on a winter road. When the timeline is that tight, a single missing detail can erase the entire path forward. And in this case, that missing detail has never been found. A third challenge is the lack of a confirmed direction of travel. Did she go into the woods? Did she walk down the road? Did she enter another vehicle? Did she seek shelter at a nearby house? Without direction, search efforts become wide instead of deep. And wide searches drain resources quickly. Even today, no one can say with evidence-backed certainty whether she went north, south, into the forest, or away by road. Another stubborn barrier is the silence of the digital trail. Modern investigations thrive on data, phone pings, digital payments, camera footage. Maura disappeared in 2004, just before the era where every movement leaves a digital fingerprint. That timing is painfully significant. Her case sits at the edge of two worlds too old to be fully traceable, too recent to leave a paper trail like cases from the past. Then there is the human element. Over the years, memories fade. Witnesses move away. Officers retire. Leads that once felt urgent lose clarity. People misremember. Files get misplaced. Efforts shift toward newer cases. Time in missing person investigations is not neutral, it actively erodes truth. Finally, there is the absence of a definitive motive. Without knowing why Maura left campus, every theory remains plausible. If the why is unknown, the what happened becomes nearly impossible to pin down. Motive is the spine of any narrative, and in this case, that spine was never found. For these reasons and more, the case remains suspended, a mystery caught between evidence that is too thin, questions that are too many, and a moment in time that no one can reconstruct with certainty. And so year after year, the same reality remains. Maura Murray's story has no ending, only echoes. Nearly 20 years have passed since that winter night on Route 112. The road itself has not changed much. Trees still line the edges. Snow still gathers in the cold months. And silence still hangs over that bend where a black Saturn once slid off the pavement. But for the people who knew and loved Maura Murray, life has never returned to what it was. Time kept moving. The world kept spinning. Yet the questions from February 9th, 2004 never found their answers. For her family, the story is not a mystery, it is a wound. A missing sister, a missing daughter. Birthdays, holidays, and milestones came and went without her. Hope became a complicated thing. Too much of it was painful. Too little of it was unbearable. They searched, they waited, and they refused to let her name fade. In their eyes, the case is not about theories or timelines. It is about bringing someone home. For investigators, the case stands as a humbling reminder that not every question yields evidence, and not every event leaves a trail. Experienced officers, seasoned search teams, and dedicated analysts all confronted the same truth. Sometimes the simplest stories can hold the deepest mysteries. The file is still open. The door is not closed. But without new information, the path forward remains uncertain. For the public, Maura's disappearance became a symbol of how a person can be here one moment and gone the next, leaving only fragments behind. People followed the case not because they craved sensation, but because they saw a reflection of something universal, the fear of the unknown, and the hope that even the most confusing stories can someday find clarity. Over time, the case sparked documentaries, books, podcasts, and countless discussions. But behind all of that noise remains one truth: a real person vanished, and a real family is still waiting for answers. So what can we learn from a story that has no ending? Perhaps the lesson is about awareness, the importance of looking twice, listening closely, and paying attention when someone in our lives changes direction without explanation. Perhaps it is about empathy, understanding that behind every headline is a human being with struggles we may never see. And perhaps it is about persistence, the belief that even after years of silence, one tip, one memory, or one discovery could change everything. One unanswered case does not erase a life. Maura's story is more than the moment she disappeared. It is the story of who she was, the people who loved her, and the search that continues. And until the truth comes to light, her name will remain spoken, her photo will remain shared, and her case will remain open in the minds of those who still care. Some mysteries go quiet. This one has refused. And for that reason, we end not with closure, but with a promise: the search for answers is not over. No matter how much time has passed, every story deserves a final chapter. And somewhere out there, the truth about what happened to Maura Murray still exists waiting, buried beneath silence, memory, and time. We can only hope that one day the answers will reach the people who have been waiting the longest. Thank you for watching and for walking with me through this mystery. If you want to continue exploring cases like this, do not forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Your voice and curiosity help keep these stories alive. Take care, stay safe, and I will see you in the next video.